Chapter 1: The Trap of the Endless List. Imagine standing at the base of a towering mountain, looking up into the clouds. The peak is completely hidden from view. In your hand, you hold a massive textbook filled with thousands of grammar rules, conjugation tables, and lists of disconnected vocabulary words. Your goal is to reach the top, to achieve true, effortless fluency in the English language. For years, this is exactly how Leo felt. Leo was an ambitious professional who needed English to advance his career, travel the world, and connect with people globally. He was incredibly disciplined. Every single evening after a long day of work, he would sit down at his desk, open his notebook, and memorize 20 new vocabulary words. He would write them down, translate them into his native language, repeat them until his throat was dry, and quiz himself before bed. By all traditional standards, Leo was doing everything right. Yet, a frustrating pattern kept repeating itself. Whenever he tried to speak in a real conversation, or whenever he sat down to write an important email, his mind would suddenly go blank. It felt as though his brain was a chaotic warehouse. He knew the words were in there somewhere, buried under boxes of grammar formulas, but he couldn't find them fast enough to catch the rhythm of natural speech. When he did manage to piece a sentence together, it felt stiff, mechanical, and painfully translated. If you're finding your flow with today's session, subscribe to the Story Shadow and join our community of English learners. Leo was trapped in a common language learning illusion. He was collecting the individual bricks of the English language, but he had absolutely no idea how the mortar worked to hold them together. One rainy Tuesday evening, completely exhausted and staring at a list of phrasal verbs that made his head spin, Leo shut his notebook. He decided he was done with lists. He walked over to his bookshelf, reached past his heavy grammar guides, and pulled down a dusty, thin paperback novel. A simple mystery story he had bought at an airport years ago but had never opened. He sat down in his armchair, turned to page 1, and made a promise to himself. He wouldn't look up a single word in the dictionary unless he was entirely lost. He was just going to read. That simple decision was the turning point. What Leo didn't realize at the time was that he was about to discover the absolute best, most scientifically proven way to truly master a language. He was moving away from the exhausting grind of forced memorization and entering the magical world of comprehensible input. He was about to let reading become the silent architect of his English fluency. Chapter 2: The Magic of Context and Comprehensible Input. To understand why reading changed everything for Leo, and why it is the most powerful tool you can use to learn English, we have to look at how the human brain actually processes language. When you memorize a list of vocabulary words, you are performing a task called decontextualized learning. You are trying to force your brain to remember a symbol, a word, without giving it an emotional hook, a visual image, or a relational network. It is like trying to remember a stranger's phone number without knowing who they are. Your brain, which is an incredibly efficient organ designed to filter out useless information, quickly deletes these isolated words to save space. But when you read a story, everything changes. When Leo began reading that mystery novel, he encountered words wrapped in a living, breathing environment. He didn't just see the word gloomy. He saw it describing a dark, foggy street in London where a detective was searching for clues. He felt the atmosphere. He saw how the word interacted with other words like shadows, drizzle, and footsteps. This is what linguists call contextual clues. When you read, your brain naturally and automatically guesses the meaning of unfamiliar words based on the surrounding sentences. You don't need a dictionary to tell you what a word means because the story itself shows you. More importantly, reading provides what Dr. Stephen Krashen famously termed comprehensible input. This theory states that we acquire language most effectively when we read or listen to content that is just one small step above our current level. If you know 90% of the words on a page, your brain can effortlessly figure out the remaining 10%. As Leo read chapter after chapter, his brain was working quietly behind the scenes. It wasn't memorizing, it was acquiring. Think of it like watching a film fade into view. The first time you see a new word in a sentence, the picture is blurry. You get a vague sense of what it means. The second time you see it, perhaps in a completely different paragraph, the edges become sharper. By the fifth or sixth time you encounter that word across different chapters, the image is crystal clear. You own that word. You didn't study it, you absorbed it. Chapter 3, Mastering Grammar Without Rules. As the weeks turned into months, Leo noticed something strange happening. One afternoon, he was writing a summary for his team at work. He wrote a long, complex sentence using a perfect conditional structure, the kind of grammar rule that used to make him panic during exams. He stopped, stared at the screen, and thought, wait, is that correct? He tried to analyze it using the formulas he had learned in school, but he couldn't remember the exact names of the tenses. However, a deep, instinctual feeling told him, yes, this is right. It sounds right. He checked it later. It was absolutely flawless. This is the second massive superpower of reading. It completely bypasses the need for conscious grammar analysis. When you study grammar rules, you are learning explicit knowledge. You are learning about the language. You become a critic who knows the structural laws, but you can't actually play the instrument fluently because you are thinking too hard about where to place your fingers. Reading turns explicit knowledge into implicit knowledge. When you read books, you are exposing your subconscious mind to thousands of perfectly constructed English sentences every single hour. You see how native speakers naturally use tenses, prepositions, and articles. You begin to recognize patterns. Your brain is a magnificent pattern recognition machine. After seeing the phrase depend on instead of depend of 100 times in a novel, your brain notes that pattern as a fundamental law. The next time you speak or write, your brain will naturally select depend on simply because anything else feels foreign and strange to your ears. Through reading, Leo stopped translating sentences in his head. He stopped building phrases like a puzzle piece by piece. Instead, he began to develop an internal voice for the English language, an intuitive sense of rhythm, structure, and style that only comes from deep, continuous exposure. Chapter 4, The Path of Least Resistance. If reading is so incredibly powerful, why doesn't everyone use it to achieve fluency? The answer lies in a common mistake that almost every language learner makes when they pick up a book. A few months after his breakthrough, Leo was so excited by his progress that he went to a bookstore and bought a copy of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. He had heard it was a masterpiece of English literature. That evening, he opened the book, eager to dive in. But by the middle of the very first page, his enthusiasm crumbled. The language was beautiful, but it was filled with complex, historical vocabulary, intricate idioms, and stylistic structures from the 1920s. Leo found himself stopping every single sentence to look up words. It took him 45 minutes just to finish 2 pages. He felt frustrated, stupid, and completely defeated. Leo had fallen into the trap of choosing material based on prestige rather than compatibility. The secret to making reading work for you is to follow the path of least resistance. This means choosing books that match your current reading level or are just slightly below it. Language learning shouldn't feel like a brutal chore. It should feel like an engaging experience. If you are a beginner, there is absolutely no shame in reading children's books or comic books. In fact, they are fantastic because the illustrations provide immediate visual context. If you are an intermediate learner, your greatest secret weapon is the graded reader. Graded readers are books, often classic novels or contemporary stories, that have been carefully rewritten using a limited vocabulary size, such as 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000 core words. They allow you to experience the joy of reading a complete story without ever hitting a wall of incomprehensible vocabulary. Another brilliant strategy Leo discovered was reading genres he already loved. He loved business biographies and science fiction. Because he already knew a lot about those topics in his native language, his brain could easily predict and understand the concepts in English. He also realized that reading modern fiction was far more practical than reading old literature. Modern novels are packed with realistic, everyday dialogues, contemporary idioms, and the exact kind of phrasing people use in casual conversations, offices, and coffee shops today. The rule is remarkably simple. If you have to look up more than 5 words per page, the book is too difficult for your current level. Close it, put it back on the shelf, and find something simpler. Your fluency will grow much faster by reading 5 simple books quickly than by struggling through one difficult book for 6 months.